The events of the 10th of September 2025 have scarred the world. Millions of lives have been impacted, and all because a radicalized young man thought he could silence the truth. A young woman is murdered on her way home from work on a subway train, and the world grows ever closer to World War III. 2025 has been a turbulent and traumatic year to say the least, and unfortunately, the further the year progresses, the worse it's getting. Good evening, you're listening to The Truth Tank and I am your host, The Tank. If this is your first time listening to The Truth Tank, a big welcome. If you're a repeat listener, welcome back. If you couldn't guess already by the somber intro, tonight's episode is going to be on the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the murder of Iryna Zarutska and the current state of the world. The world is edging ever closer to another global conflict. 2025 hasn't been the most peaceful of years. The last 5 years have been a total fucking train wreck in my opinion. Things are not getting better. I'm usually a hopeless optimist, but in the last couple of weeks and months, it seems like the current state of the world is only getting worse and worse and worse. And now with the events of the 10th of September, Charlie Kirk's assassination, and the murder of Iryna Zarutska, two completely random but seamlessly connected events, really does sum up the state of things in the United States. And I love the United States. It is one of my favorite countries, and this episode is not meant to offend any of my American listeners, which there are a few of. I'm appreciative of every one of you for your support over the years. I felt compelled to do this episode to better understand the current political landscape and to try to dig deeper into what has happened in American culture over the past several years. I was a fan of Charlie Kirk's, much like a lot of you listening probably were. I thought he was very moderate and rational. I usually don't buy into those political commentators and influencers who are always spooking the end of the world or the sky is falling, or who are so extreme. I see through that pretty easily. I've never really been one to get on those type of bandwagons. There are some who make a good point, but you kind of take it with a grain of sand because it's one person's opinion after all. But Charlie was different. I remember watching a couple of his videos probably 2 years ago. I used to watch his shorts on YouTube whenever I'd see his face pop up. Because he was moderate, he was very rational in his debating and his arguments. He was always respectful of the person he was debating. And he made a pretty good point. Whether you agreed with his conservative religious views or his political views, you could still see his point of view without having to scream and get completely blinded by anger because someone said something that you didn't agree with. And I didn't agree with everything he said. I thought he was right on probably 65 to 75% of the things he would talk about. He did make some very good points, and if I didn't agree with him, he could usually back up his argument rationally and logically, which is what this show is all about, is trying to approach things from a logical standpoint. I don't like to be over the top or be completely irrational just for the sake of listens or likes or downloads. I am a conspiracy theorist, I guess you could call me. I like to consider myself a conspiracy realist, but I like to approach even the most outlandish conspiracy theories from a place of logic to see if there is any truth to them. And look, a lot of them are completely full of shit, but there are a lot of them that are true. And that was one thing I really appreciated about Charlie Kirk, is that he could approach someone from a different walk of life, give his perspective on things and his advice, but he didn't shove it down people's throats. He was very rational and very logical in his debates. I remember one that really stands out was when a young woman at her college said that she was meant to be aborted as a baby. My parents didn't want her, and she is so grateful for her life, no matter how tragic or traumatic the start of it was. That was a very touching clip of his I saw. He isn't an advocate of abortion, and he's been fiercely opposed to it, as a lot of religious conservatives people are, whether you agree with it or not. It's a different debate entirely. I saw another clip the other day where he was talking to a young trans woman at a college who said she's very confused about the mixed messages she gets in her own community and how she doesn't know what to believe. And he gave her some very sound advice, saying don't put medications or drugs into your body because you will make a fragile situation even worse and you could do irreparable damage to your body. Talk to people, talk to doctors, talk to medical professionals or whoever's in your community to try to get to the root causes of why you are thinking or feeling a certain way. That's a very good way to approach things. I don't think we need to be screaming at each other anymore. I think those days are hopefully gone, but I don't think they are. What happened to civil discord or a civilized exchange of ideas? That's the only way people learn anything new, is if they open their mind, listen to other people, read, find this information out for themselves and come to their own conclusions. I don't agree with everything that's been written in history books, but that doesn't mean I disregard history entirely. That would be ignorant and it would be completely foolish and stupid. Some ideas need to go the way of the dodo, others need more digging to get to the truth of them, but it doesn't mean there isn't some truth there. But screaming and arguing at other historians for their point of view isn't going to make me learn anything any quicker. It's not going to do anything to my knowledge base or make me a smarter or more well-informed individual. Unfortunately, when it comes to politics, especially in the United States, that's where we find ourselves. Yelling at one another for political beliefs and ideologies, ignore logic and rational thought in favour of extreme ideas. I'm not pointing the finger at any particular side in this. The left and right are both to blame. In recent years, the left probably more so. That's not me favouring one side over the other. That's me making a rational conclusion based on the evidence available to me. And this episode is probably going to be a long one. I might have to break it into two parts, so if you don't hear my thoughts on Charlie Kirk's assassination in this episode, it will be on part 2, which should be coming out probably a week after part 1. His death has touched the lives of millions of people right around the globe. But at the same time, I'm not surprised. He was a popular figure on the internet and social media. Everything goes viral these days. So I'm not really surprised that Charlie Kirk's reach was global. He has had a profound impact on the United States and the rest of the globe. I think his ideas and his message really did reach further than he probably ever thought they would, because there's a lot of political and conservative people in Australia. There was a rally yesterday for him. I probably would have gone if I had known it was on. And it is amazing to see how respected and loved he was and how his passing has affected so many lives. It's very much a 21st century phenomenon, because even 50 years ago, I don't think well-known people's deaths had this much of an impact on a global scale. There was always the outliers, of course. There was always the Princess Diana's, Queen Elizabeth, Muhammad Ali, those larger-than-life figures who have a global reach. When a figure like that passes, yes, it does affect the world on a global scale. I remember going to Government House to sign the condolence book for the Queen. Being a Commonwealth country, that is of some importance. The mayor gave a speech to the crowd, encouraged people to sign the book, because there is a bit of a formal process, because you have to acknowledge the passing of a king or queen and recognise the succession of the new king or queen. In this case, it was King Charles, so there is a bit of a ceremony to it, being in a Commonwealth country. The death of political figures such as JFK would have had global impacts as well. Besides very high-profile celebrities and athletes, political figures and members of royal families, you don't really see global grieving on such a grand scale, because there's been tons of famous people who have passed away in the last, well, forever really, but like if we focus on the last 5 years, I don't think that really any of them besides Queen Elizabeth has had such a public outpouring of grief. There's that soccer player in England? I can't remember his name. I'm not into soccer. He was from Portugal. He was killed in a car accident. The team he played for had a big memorial for him at the start of the year. I haven't seen quite the scale of candlelight vigils and public memorials and outpouring of grief that I've seen in the case of Charlie Kirk. I don't recall ever seeing people having candlelight vigils for Gene Hackman's passing, or one of the royals that just recently passed away like a week or two ago, which shows the significance and the importance of a figure like Charlie Kirk and just how he has affected so many lives. Yes, he was political, but he wasn't. Yes, he was a political figure, but he wasn't serving in the Republican Party. He wasn't in the president's cabinet or anything. He wasn't the vice president. He was a political commentator. So to see someone who was a political commentator and a conservative Christian be so respected globally is a bit of a cultural phenomenon. Because as I said, like, he's not a member of a royal family. I suppose he's a bit of a minor celebrity. He's not an actor. He's not an athlete. I know a few people who hadn't even heard of him and didn't understand what the big deal was. But if you are on social media a lot or YouTube, you probably would know who he is. And it does show what a special individual he was. And while, yeah, there are public outpourings of grief and vigils for other people, like Ozzy Osbourne a couple of weeks ago in Birmingham, that was his hometown. There were memorials around the world, but where I am, there wasn't a public vigil or outpouring of grief for Ozzy Osbourne. It was more people paying tribute to him on Instagram and Facebook and social media. I'm rambling a bit, you probably understand what I'm saying. So this is going to be a heavy episode. It's going to look at the assassination of Charlie Kirk and the murder of Iryna Zarutska, as well as some pretty big global events that have happened in the past couple of weeks, such as the Qatar bombing, the Russian drone shot down over Poland, and the current state of world events. If you've listened to me for any amount of time, I like to connect the threads and see how everything connects, and that's what I'll be doing with this episode. As I mentioned, I did like Charlie Kirk. I wasn't a huge super fan. I don't think I've listened to his podcast. I've heard him on podcasts. I watched his shorts basically on a weekly basis. I probably would have listened to his podcast, but you know how it is. I have dozens of podcasts to listen to on a weekly basis. It's impossible to get to all of them. But I did respect the man. I liked his message and his ability to cut through the bullshit, be moderate and tolerant of other people's ideas. He was someone that inspired me to have a similar outlook towards other people's opinions, to hear what they're saying, exchange my ideas and outlook with them in a moderate and civil way. I think he was an inspiration to a lot of younger people, especially people who want to get into political commentating or public speaking, because there isn't a lot of that with a lot of modern commentators these days. Everybody has to be so extreme for the sake of feeding the social media algorithm. Charlie did not do that. He stuck true to his core beliefs and approached things from a place of logic and rationale. He wanted to spread his version of the truth, but he was willing to listen to other people's truth and debate them and tell them why they might be wrong. He was a good man that didn't deserve what happened to him. My condolences to Erica Kirk and the Kirk family. I think the world needs a bit more civility and understanding at the moment, a bit more logic and rationale over extreme points of view and finger pointing. So it's going to be a heavy and dark episode. I was meant to record a history of bioweapons part 5, but I thought I had to say something about the events of the last couple of weeks. So let's not waste any more time. Let's get straight into the episode. This is episode 84 of the Truth Tank. American Martyr. The assassination of Charlie Kirk. the murder of Iryna Zarutska, and the current state of the world. We begin with the murder of 23-year-old Ukrainian refugee Iryna Zarutska on a subway train in North Carolina. She was coming home from her shift at the pizza place where she worked, where she was murdered by a psychopathic demon of a man who should have been locked up a long time ago. And this episode is going to contain a lot of news articles too. It'll probably be pretty long, so please bear that in mind. To get further background on this, what I have found to be a very disturbing crime, watching the video of the attack was highly disturbing and frankly sickening. I didn't watch the full unedited version. I just watched the one on the news. I couldn't watch that. I don't want to see that. And I think that's something that is really wrong with this generation. The amount of death and murder that is on social media and the internet is truly disturbing and does not say much about the Western civilization if that's what we have access to. And these social media companies just don't want to do anything about it. You can silence a person for a political opinion online, but you can't do anything about sharing horrific, heinous videos of people losing their lives. So for better background on the murder of Miss Zarutska, I found an article on theguardian.com titled "Suspect in Stabbing of Ukrainian Woman in North Carolina Charged with Federal Crime." The Carlos Brown Jr. accused of killing Iryna Zarutska in apparent random attack on train could face the death penalty. I think that is warranted in this case. The Justice Department on Tuesday charged a man of fatally stabbing Ukrainian refugee on a North Carolina commuter train last month with a federal crime that could carry the death penalty. The federal charge comes amid growing questions about why Carlos Brown Jr. was on the street despite 14 prior criminal arrests before he was accused of pulling out a knife and killing 23-year-old Iryna Zarutska in an apparently random attack captured on video. Doesn't say much for the state of the justice system, and that isn't just a United States issue either. There's people in Australia and England, they get a slap on the wrist for breaking into people's houses repeatedly. There's a big problem with youth crime, especially in Victoria. Kids are getting arrested 20 times and they're being released on bail an hour later, then they're going back half an hour later, stealing another car or breaking into someone's house because it's just a giant video game to them and there's no consequences for their actions. This is something that really pisses me off. And a guy like this that is clearly sick in the fucking head and should have been in a fucking cage or a padded room eating fucking porridge through a fucking straw doesn't say a hell of a lot for the current state of the justice system. How can you have 14 prior criminal arrests and not be in jail? And this guy's in his 30s too. He's been arrested most of his adult life. So why wasn't he fucking locked up? Why was he allowed to interact with the public? A couple of years ago, where I am, we used to have a mental health facility that was very well known. They closed it down and let all the nuts out onto the street. Yeah, some of them were just, your normal mental health issues. But there were a lot of them that were very dangerous to the public at large, and they were let out and they ended up murdering people. And this is the same thing all over the world. Some people need to be fucking locked up. And we're not talking about people who have run-of-the-mill mental health issues. We're talking about dangerous schizophrenics who are hearing voices to commit violent acts. And this cunt apparently was arrested a month or two ago, back in April or May, and told the police officers that he was trying to get some implant in his body that was telling him to eat ice cream or something like that. Someone like that is completely fucked in the head. That's when you're like, okay, there's something not wrong with this guy. He needs to be locked up and have counselling. And if that doesn't work, he probably needs to just spend his life in a fucking mental institution. Because the political correct view for releasing a lot of dangerously mentally ill people into the community was They need to be treated like humans too. Yes, I agree with that, but on a case-by-case basis. As I just said, if you've got someone hearing voices in their head telling them to commit violent acts, chances are they are probably going to go do that because they don't know reality from the voices in their head. The voices in their head are the fucking reality, and they're going to carry out whatever it is that these voices tell them to do. And we've seen this play out time and time again, and it's nothing new. So what about treating the victims of these people's crimes with a little bit more respect? They wouldn't be victims of crimes committed by these people if they were properly institutionalized in the first place, because some people you cannot help. And there is, or there used to be anyway, wards or wings in prisons for the criminally insane. I mean, Batman is a perfect example of that. Fucking Arkham Asylums, where you chucked all the nuts because they were too dangerous to fit in anywhere else. And unfortunately, political correctness and wokeism in the Western world is coming at odds with logic and what should be really like a clear-cut yes or no kind of a case. How do you arrest a guy 14 times and he not be in jail? Because the judges have gone fucking woke. How does he walk the street? How is he allowed to walk the street? It's disturbing because I know where I am and in America and in Britain, it seems like the justice system is favouring the perpetrator rather than the victim. Oh, he's mentally ill, he can't get a job, he can't do that, boo fucking who. He needs some clemency while the victim is either dead or left with permanent injuries or is traumatised, or in extreme cases they lose their life to these people. And it seems like the justice system has a lot to answer for because they should have locked this fucking animal up a long fucking time ago. The case has become the latest flashpoint in a debate over whether cities such as Charlotte are adequately addressing violent crime, mental illness, and transit safety. And I think all those issues are all interconnected. There is definitely a link between violent crime and mental illness. Are there many people out there that are that surprised that a lot of violence does happen on public transport? A lot of these people can't hold a driver's license or have the money for a car or registration or the fuel, and the only way they get around is by public transport. It's cheap. They need to get out of the house because they keep hearing the voices, and if they go to a public area where they have a couple of hours of distraction, the voices go a bit quiet. They get on a train or a bus, and something triggers them, and they assault another passenger, or in this case, take an innocent 23-year-old's life. The Trump administration says the killing shows how local leaders, judges, and policies in Democratic-led cities are failing to protect their residents from violent crime. Interesting. Trump is pushing the far-left agenda with that one, I do think, because it's probably not just left-leaning cities. This probably happens everywhere. I know in Australia, the violent crime on public transport is on the rise. Across the board, it's usually pretty safe, but at least once a week there's a fight, someone attacks a driver or someone attacks another passenger or throws a brick through a window. So it's not just left or right states. I think this is probably pretty consistent across the board. But I don't know, I'm making an assumption. Maybe Republican majority cities are tougher on mental illness and violent crime. I don't know. Quote, Iryna Zarutska was a young woman living the American dream. Her horrific murder is the direct result of failed, soft-on-crime policies that put criminals before innocent people. And I would agree with that because it does happen globally in the Western world. The US Attorney General Pam Bondi said in a statement, "We will seek the maximum penalty for this unforgivable act of violence. He will never again see the light of day as a free man." That is good, but it should have happened pretty much after the third attempt, because whatever happens to 3 strikes and you're out. And apparently it's 14 strikes and you're out now, but you have to kill somebody in order to go to jails. If there is one positive in this horrific crime, maybe it is that Iryna Zarutska's legacy is to help change the laws to prevent things like this from happening in the future. Zarutska had been living in a bomb shelter in Ukraine before coming to the US to escape the war, according to relatives, who described her as determined to build a safer life. Unfortunately, she survived the war zone only to lose her life on public transport in a foreign country. And this crime, I didn't hear about it at the time because it was not on the news here. I kept seeing it pop up on social media, so I looked into it to find out what it had happened and what it was all about. And yeah, it disturbed me. Not a lot of things do these days. I'm pretty shock-proof at this point, but Charlie Kirk's assassination and the death of Iryna Zarutska really have disturbed me. A video released on Friday shows Zarutska entering a light train on the 22nd of August and taking a seat in front of Brown, who was seated behind her. Minutes later, without any apparent interaction, he pulled out a pocket knife, stood and slashed her in the neck. Investigators said passengers screamed and scattered as she collapsed. From what I could see, no one really helps her either. There's a woman sitting across from her who just keeps looking out the window because they don't want to be a part of it. And yeah, there's an argument you don't want to also get attacked or killed by a lunatic, but nobody tried to help her when she was injured, and that's the most disturbing part. And unfortunately, it's not a surprise in this unempathetic society we find ourselves in. Everyone was just too busy on their phones, minding their own business, and she died alone on public transport in a foreign country. I did see an extended security footage clip where that fucking animal gets up, walks through the train carriage mumbling incoherently. There's blood dripping everywhere. People see the blood and are stepping over the blood, but no one really tends to look where it actually came from. He takes his jumper off and leaves the train. There was a guy in a grey tracksuit, by the look of it, a younger guy who goes running up the back of the train and sees her. Then people started to scream. But that wasn't for a decent amount of time. He had enough time to take his jumper off and get off the train, and you couldn't really see what was happening at the other end of the train because it was the shot was from the carriage back, and apparently there was transit security or transit police on the other car that didn't know about it because nobody was screaming or jumping up and down at the time she was stabbed. I think in the end a couple of people did help her, but she had already passed away by then. And the look on her face when she gets attacked was the most distressing part. She had no idea what was happening. And when she covers her face, she, I think, realizes that she probably wasn't going to make it and ended up dying in the fetal position on the train. The people that were behind that fucking animal, who could see what had happened and sitting across from her, didn't get out of their seats to help. From what I saw, maybe they did in a longer clip, but from what I saw, nobody bothers to help except for that guy with the grey tracksuit and another man. But that was after she was already in the fetal position and she'd either already passed at that time or was very close to. He was charged federally with causing death on a mass transportation system, which carries up to life in prison or the death penalty. Russ Ferguson, the U.S. Attorney for the Western District of North Carolina, said additional charges could be brought as the investigation continues. The federal case will run parallel with the state case charging Brown with first-degree murder. The death penalty is also a potential punishment for people convicted of first-degree murder in North Carolina. However, the state has not carried out an execution since 2006. Legal challenges over the use of lethal injection, drugs, and a doctor's presence at executions have in part delayed action. Well, when he's tried guilty, you could always just blow his fucking brains out. You don't need to have a lethal injection. Bring back the electric chair. Firing squad. This animal deserves to pay for what he has done. And the judges and the justice system that let him get away with 14 strikes need to be held in account as well. Brown had cycled through the criminal justice system for more than a decade, including serving 5 years for robbery with a dangerous weapon in Mecklenburg County, according to court records. He was arrested earlier this year after repeatedly calling 911 from a hospital. Claiming people were trying to control him, a judge released him without bail. That judge has blood on their hands, in my opinion. A guy that spends 5 years in jail for robbery with a dangerous weapon and thinks people are trying to control him in the hospital is probably out of his fucking mind. And there's probably something seriously wrong with the cunt. And putting him back on the street is probably not the smartest thing to do. His mother told local television she sought an involuntary psychiatric commitment this year after he became violent at home. Doctors diagnosed him with schizophrenia. Nothing was done. If his own mother sought involuntary psychiatric commitment, there's probably something deeply fucking wrong with this guy. If he's diagnosed with schizophrenia, he probably should have been locked up. And unfortunately, I do know a certain individual who has schizophrenia, and he definitely needs to be locked up and has spent time in a mental institution. Court records show a judge ordered a psychological exam in July at the request of his public defender to determine whether he was capable of contributing to his own defence. It was not clear if the exam was scheduled or why it did not happen before the late August attack. If the prosecutors and judge thought there was enough evidence that this guy needed a psychological exam, sounds like he probably should have been in custody until the court date, and that he probably posed a pretty serious risk to public safety. And now we're in this position where a young woman has lost her life because this guy should have been fucking locked up. Charlotte has increased security along its transit lines in response to the fatal stabbing. It's a bit too late for that. Mayor Vi Lyles said in a letter to the city's residents, the Democratic mayor's letter was also critical of the court system, echoing some of the critics of the city's response. I think that's pretty fair too. Lyles called the killing, quote, a tragic failure by the courts and magistrates, saying the city's officers arrest people who are then quickly released. And that's not just a US or Charlotte problem. That happens here. It happens in Victoria pretty much every hour. Someone who breaks the law is arrested and then released only to go out and commit further crimes. The stabbing comes as Lyles is seeking the Democratic nomination on Tuesday in her bid for a fifth term, and uproar from Republicans, including Trump and figures in the Make America Great Again movement. The state auditor, Republican Dave Bolek, said his office would audit Charlotte's transit system, looking at its safety and security budget and private security contractors. Okay, interesting. And yeah, unfortunately, this situation is also going to get politicized. A young woman has lost her life. Makes you wonder if this fifth term nomination wasn't coming up, would she be as inclined to act so hardly? The other disturbing aspect of this is it's being used to further divide people racially. I've heard a lot of people saying, oh, this is a white guy who killed her, he would be arrested instantly, he would have been in jail, yada yada yada. I heard Van Jones, a CNN commentator, try to rationalize it, saying something about the system failed because it couldn't find a way to help Mr. Brown. I'm sorry, he's not the one that was murdered on a fucking train. He's the one that did the murdering. Kind of overlooking the fact that this guy has been arrested and charged 14 fucking times. After 3 times, I don't think he'd get a pass, especially if it's for the same thing. He was trying to say that we failed in helping this guy and why he eventually did what he did. Completely disregard the victim. And I think comments like that have really just divided people and turned this into a race issue rather than an evil man ended an innocent woman's life because he was mentally disturbed. We're not talking about someone who has mental health issues. We're talking about someone who is mentally ill and is a danger to the public. Mr. Jones also was wearing what it looks like to be a Ukrainian pin or flag on his lapel, which is of further irony because it was a young Ukrainian woman that was killed by the guy, from what I could tell from the short clip that I watched, was trying to defend the perpetrator and not the victim. And when I did watch the video from the CCTV, apparently Mr. Brown is walking through the train car dripping blood all over the floor, saying, I got that white woman, and that the reason he killed her is he thought she was trying to read his mind. And if you see the video, the way he looks at her, and he pulls a knife out, you could see what he was doing, and someone else turns around on the train and gets a glance of him pulling something out of his pocket. It is so horrifying and disturbing. She's minding her own business on her phone, and he just gets up and stabs her in the neck. I think in this case they need to bring back the death penalty for this fucking monster. He's not going to change. He's not going to learn. You just look at the mugshot of him. He looks like he is out of his fucking mind. I found another article on news.com.au that goes into the alleged motivations of this monster. The article is titled "Alleged Train Killer Reveals Motive During Chilling Phone Call from Jail" by Anthony Blair, originally posted from the New York Post. Accused killer Carlos Brown Jr. told his family he stabbed the Ukrainian refugee Iryna Zarutska to death on board a train in Charlotte because he believed she was reading his mind, his sister has claimed. As is his chilling words from jail are revealed. Tracy Brown, who was also assaulted by her older brother in 2022 in a 2022 attack that saw him bite her and break a door, said he is paranoid schizophrenic who told her multiple times that the government had implanted a chip in him. Quote, "A person that is hearing voices in their head and believes the world is against them, they're going to break. And I think that night he broke," she told CNN. Disturbing audio of Brown's phone conversation with his sister from jail captures his rambling explanation for why he attacked the innocent woman. Brown can be heard telling his sister that, quote, "the material in his body, not he, had killed Iryna," according to audio from a call made on August 28th, 6 days after the murder, and shared with the Daily Mail. This is a quote from Mr. Brown. "I hurt my hand stabbing her." "Oh, really, did you? I guess we all feel so fucking sorry for your hand." "I didn't even know the lady. I never said not one word to the lady at all. That's scary, ain't it?" "Why would somebody stab somebody for no reason?" Brown is heard saying. "I don't know, Mr. Brown, maybe you should be telling us why you killed her." This guy is a fucking lunatic. And I just hope the insanity clause cannot be used during his trial. He's already had 14 strikes. He should never ever be released from jail after what he did. Tracy then asks, quote, "Out of all people, why her? She's from the Ukraine. She's from Russia, and they had a war going on against the United States. So I'm just trying to understand, of all people, why her?" Brown responds, quote, "They just lashed out on her. That's what happened. That's all there is to it. Now they really got to investigate what my body was exposed to. Now they got to do an investigation as to who was the motive behind what happened." It's hard to tell if is this guy certifiably insane or is he just gaslighting the authorities to make himself seem crazier than he actually is, because he wants to do an investigation on what happened to his body or what his body has been exposed to. I think probably the next thing his body should be exposed to is, I know, a 45 round to the back of the head. Probably be a good place to start. It sounds like this guy is hamming it up, gaslighting it to make it sound worse than it actually is, because he knows what he's done is wrong. Or he is just completely fucking insane. He has no idea what fucking planet he's on. Tracy's mother told CNN she had tried to get Brown placed on a long-term mental care facility, but couldn't because she wasn't his legal guardian, she said. Tracy said her brother's behaviour deteriorated after he was freed from prison in 2022 following a 5-year sentence for armed robbery. Quote, "He didn't seem like himself." Is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? He didn't seem like his self before he committed armed robbery, because he went to jail for 5 years for a robbery with a dangerous weapon. Now, someone who does that is either desperate or crazy enough to think they can get away with it. One, or if not both of those statements, has to be true in this case. If he didn't seem like himself after he came out of prison, what the fuck was he like before? After he got out of prison in 2022, that was either the 13th or the 14th time that he was charged with something and was arrested. So what was he like prior to the 14 arrests? By that statement, I'm going to go out on a limb and say he was probably fucking crazier than he was before he went to jail, because that would be the only logical explanation. She said, describing how he struggled to hold conversations and become aggressive, failing to hold down a regular job. And well, no fucking surprise there. Brown was failed by the state, his younger sister said. adding that he was, quote, not safe to be out in the streets. Now, I think we can agree with that. Quote, he was high risk. He was not in his right mind. He was not safe for society. We know what he has been dealing with the last 3 years. And now an innocent woman is dead, she told the Mail. I think we can all agree that the justice system has majorly failed and fucked up in this situation. This guy should never have been out on the street to begin with. After he's released from prison, things go sideways very quickly and his mental health deteriorates even further than it already has. And not committing him to the nut house was probably the biggest mistake in all of this. It sounds like he should have been in one a long time ago. Brown's second most recent arrest on January 19 came after he called 911 during a welfare check, telling the cops he believed his brain was being controlled by a microchip. Quote, Brown wanted officers to investigate this man-made material that was inside of his body. His arrest affidavit reads, quote, officers advised Brown that the issue was a medical issue and that there was nothing further they could do. The affidavit states, at which point Brown flew into a rage and was arrested and charged with, quote, misuse of the 911 system. At a January 21 hearing, Magistrate Judge Teresa Stokes was told about Brown's case, but granted him cashless bail on, quote, a written promise that he would show up to a future fucking court date. How did you become a fucking judge in the first place if you were that gullible? A written promise from a schizophrenic that probably can't even remember writing the note in the first place. Stokes ordered a psychiatric test for Brown through the courts, but, quote, they pushed it back for a year and a half, Tracy said, and that has brought us to the current situation where a young woman is dead at the hands of a man that should never have been let out of jail in the first place. Quote, he was seeking help. He called 911 multiple times. Instead of talking to him, they thought charging him was going to help. Yeah, well, the police are there to protect and serve. They're not a counselling service. The attack has left Zarutska's family bereft and calling for a solution to systemic failures in the city's public safety. Quote, we are heartbroken beyond words. Iryna came here to find peace and safety. Instead, her life was stolen from her in the most horrific way, a family spokesman said in a statement issued by her lawyers. Quote, no family should have to go through this. Her relatives demanded that prosecutors lock up Brown and address the, quote, broader crisis in public safety and systemic failures. It's a tragic, sad and bizarre case. There's so many things that have failed and so many chances to take this guy off the streets, which would have prevented this from happening. And as I mentioned before, it's going to be politicized. You have a Ukrainian refugee being murdered on a train by a lunatic. There's lots of finger pointing. There's lots of name calling on both sides. I found another article on Politico.com titled Ukrainian refugee killed in North Carolina gets dragged into political messaging war by Jacob Wendler, 9th of the 8th, 2025. And that's the big problem with this case in particular, is the political shit is going to overshadow the victim in all of this. While it might have happened in a left city under a left government, I don't think it's that constructive to point the finger and name call any political side over the other. An innocent woman is dead, and real change is needed to stop it from happening again. A young refugee from Ukraine was killed in an apparently random attack in North Carolina, is being pulled into America's culture war. Iryna Zarutska, who was stabbed on light rail last month by a man with a history of mental illness and previous arrests, became the subject of a social media post Monday by President Donald Trump. The president blamed her killing on policies by Democrats, including former Governor Roy Cooper, who was running the Senate in North Carolina in one of the most closely watched races of 2026. This is a quote from Trump. The blood of this innocent woman can literally be seen dripping from the killer's knife. And now her blood is on the hands of the Democrats who refuse to put bad people in jail, including former disgraced governor and, quote, wannabe Senator Roy Cooper, Trump wrote. His post comes amid a broader push by the Trump administration, which has deployed troops to LA and Washington over the objections of local officials. to make a law and order pitch to voters despite falling rates of violent crime across the country. The attack on the 23-year-old Zarutska, who came to the US to escape Russia's invasion of her country, was captured on security video and has been widely condemned by local officials in North Carolina. The suspect has been taken into custody on a charge of first-degree murder. In his social media post, the president reiterated his endorsement of former Republican National Committee Chair Michael Whatley in the Senate race, writing that, quote, only Republicans will deliver on crime and order for North Carolina. Whatley, who called Trump's response to the murder spot on, has seized on the attack to assail Cooper's record on crime, falsely suggesting that a 2020 executive order signed by the former governor was responsible for the release of DeCarlos Brown Jr., the suspect in Zarutska's killing, from prison after a 5-year sentence for robbery. The executive order, which established a task force for racial equality in criminal justice, did not call for the early release of anyone convicted of a crime, and its first recommendations were not released until after Brown's release. Interesting. I think the real victim is being overlooked for finger-pointing. The situation's turned very chaotic, and it's now Republican versus Democrat. Yes, there was probably some mistakes made by previous governors and judges, and those mistakes do need to be pointed out so they don't happen again. There's no plan from what I've read that would suggest that much change has really happened to the overall justice system to prevent further things like this happening again. Kate Smart, a spokesperson for Cooper's campaign, called the attack a heartbreaking, despicable act of evil and accused Whatley of lying again because he knows his support for federal policies that cut local and state law enforcement funding is wrong for North Carolina in a statement. Quote, Roy Cooper knows North Carolinians need to be safe in their communities. He spent his career prosecuting violent criminals and drug dealers, increasing the penalties for violence against law enforcement, and keeping thousands of criminals off the streets and behind bars, she said. So who do you believe? I guess if you're a Republican, you're going to choose a Republican side. If you're a Democrat, you're going to choose a Democrat side. So who's telling the truth, who's lying, and who is trying to save face in light of a bigger political scandal? And that's the problem. This should just be a case of an innocent woman losing her life at the hands of a fucking maniac. And it's been politicized to the point I think the victim is being overlooked in this. The killing of Zarutska has attracted substantial attention from mega firebrands such as Charlie Kirk and Alora Luma on social media since the city's transit system released surveillance footage of the fatal stabbing on Friday. This article was written prior to Charlie Kirk's passing. Unfortunately, I think that last article kind of indicates that both sides are just going to point fingers at each other, blame each other for past mistakes. Who do you fucking believe in this situation? Who's telling the truth? Who's full of shit? And unfortunately, it's making a complex situation even worse. And this is the state of 2025 at the moment. The last few weeks have been chaotic in a year that has seen its fair share of chaos and negativity. Last couple of years, in fact, have been pretty shit, and things seem to be escalating. Unfortunately, global politics has just become a cesspool of chaos and ideology. Politicians forget that they get elected to serve the people, not themselves or their interests. There doesn't seem to be any logic anymore, especially from politicians who you would think should be the most level-headed, logical, and rational people on the planet. Because if you're going to make life-altering decisions for the people you serve, you better be morally fucking centered. And that doesn't seem to be the case. World leaders have been replaced with genocidal, narcissistic sociopaths. I'm not pointing my finger at anyone in particular, but you can probably make your own assumptions on who the good and bad world leaders are. People come in second, and in most cases third now. Profit comes first. Decency and the right thing to do have been forgotten. And this is not a situation that has sprung about overnight either. It's not a 2025 issue or an issue that has been around since 2025 or post-plague. The past 25 years in the post 9/11 years, in my opinion, have been the most violent, depraved, corrupt, chaotic, disturbing, and outright aggravating. The 1900s were chaotic, and every decade and generation has its history-making events and its own brand of chaos. World War I was raging. You had German sabotage on a global scale. Assassinations were a common thing, such as the assassination of Franz Ferdinand that kick-started World War I. 1900s also had its fair share of disasters, ocean liner sinkings, such as the Lusitania, and you had the Titanic. Fast forward a few years, and you get to the era of dictators. Dictators were everywhere. You had Adolf Hitler, Franco in Spain, Mussolini, Stalin. World War II kicks off, and the era of mass death and genocide, oppression and despair, plus the birth of the nuclear bomb. While the 1900s were, I suppose, as chaotic as 2000 to 2025, I'd say the big difference back then is you knew who the bad guys were. Things seemed to be more black and white. It was the good guys versus the bad guys. These days, there are varying shades of grey, and nothing is straightforward anymore. And I suppose the other big issue is everything is viral now. If something happens an hour ago on the other side of the world, you see it on your phone or your computer. Well, back in the 1900s, you had to probably wait 6 months for a paper to arrive or the information from the frontline reporter. You had to get the pictures developed. Everything took time. You could process your thoughts and get a clearer understanding of what had happened before something went to print or a book was published with a photo or an article or a story in it. Well, these days, everything is happening so quickly. In the case of Charlie Kirk's assassination, within an hour, there's thousands of articles plastered all over the internet. Fast forward 5, 10, 15, 20 hours, and that's jumped to thousands of articles, and we're supposed to sift through all of this. All this information is regurgitated in some form from a frontline source or whoever got the information out there first. Unfortunately, a lot of it comes from social media like X and Facebook and Instagram. The journalistic integrity isn't there as opposed to the 1900s. And while other generations and periods of time have been chaotic, I think in the last 25 years, things seem to be getting more chaotic. Maybe that's just our perception based on our information overload and social media culture. That does play a part in it for sure. It does seem that there is more intolerance in the world and things are getting more chaotic. Just in my lifetime, there's been more wars and lives lost. The past 25 years in particular has pretty much been a cycle of non-stop war. Just in my lifetime, there's been non-stop wars. There's the US invasion of Panama, the first Gulf War, Somalia, the war in Indonesia, the Yugoslav wars, or the Balkan wars, the war on terror. What else has there been? All the never-ending wars in the Middle East, Russia, Ukraine, Israel versus everyone, Israel versus everyone again. It's just been a non-stop cycle of fucking conflict. Just when you think one war is over, another one begins, or another one begins in secret that you don't even know about. So just in my lifetime, there's been a lot of conflicts. And when you look back on that on a global historical scale, yes, there's always been conflict and war. There's always some civil war in a country that you haven't heard about, or a civil war somewhere. But just from my perspective, it does seem like that war and conflict definitely seems to be on the uptick. No one wants to talk out their problems anymore. Peace deals and agreements don't seem to go anywhere. And a lot of countries seem to be more willing to fight than to listen. And there's varying reasons for this, of course, but everything is connected after all. The Washington Warhawks want perpetual conflict and war so they can profit off of more death and destruction. And these are the same people that are so far removed from the process and horrors of war. They should never be allowed in a civilized world to make decisions or wield the power to send others to fight and die for their profit margins. And despite having access to 24-hour news. Most conflicts around the world are unknown or glossed over in the favour of a story about Kim Kardashian's new line of gymwear, or a story about a celebrity that has fallen out of favour or death of a public figure. A recent conflict that has come to my attention is the situation in Nepal, which has barely made the mainstream news. I've only heard about it online. I haven't seen a single story on it on the news services here. Admittedly, they are pretty shit, so that doesn't really surprise me. But there's some that have barely made the news or haven't really made the news at all. Some I knew about, and others I had no idea. So the major ongoing conflicts, according to Google, in 2025 are the Russia-Ukraine war. That comes in at number 1, which should be no surprise given the scale of it. Next is the Israel-Palestine conflict, the Sudanese civil war, which does not get any media attention. That first started in April of 2023, so it's been going for a couple of years now. And Sudan has a very long history of war and conflict, so it's nothing new. Next is the Myanmar civil war, which has been raging since 2021, which I think started off as a military coup or a civil uprising of some type and got out of hand from there. Next up is the Haitian gang violence that has spread around the country and pretty much forced the government out. I think they were even getting African troops into Haiti to try to restore peace. Apparently it's pretty fucked too. Some of the gangs have taken over like entire areas of the country, and they're literally pushing back against government forces because I think they outnumber them. And then there's the other, not quite on the war scale of things yet, but these are pretty high-risk conflicts that could potentially turn into something much bigger, one of which is Iran and Israel and their tensions. They've been going at each other for a long time, but in the last year, tensions between Iran and Israel have really heated up. And there's the varying conflicts, smaller conflicts in sub-Saharan Africa, such as the conflicts in Congo and Ethiopia. Once again, there's been a lot of conflict in these countries. It hasn't really gone away. It kind of goes quiet for 20 years and cycles back around. Another conflict that has gone pretty quiet now is the India-Pakistan conflict over tensions in Kashmir. There was some bombings on one of the sides or both of the sides for a couple of weeks. That's gone quiet at the moment, and once again, India and Pakistan have gone at it over the decades, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. And then there is the more covert, shadowy conflicts that may or may not become future wars. The bigger one being the US versus China over the tensions in Taiwan and the Straits of Taiwan and the Korean Peninsula. That has a potential in the future to be a major conflict that could draw in a lot of other nations. Then there are the other more known about but remains to be seen kind of conflicts, such as climate change and an AI takeover. The 2025 has been really fun and positive so far. Can't wait to see what 2026 and beyond bring. So let's get a bit more background onto the conflict in Nepal. I don't know too much about this at all. I only know the basic details. It's got something to do with the people being pretty pissed off with the corruption of the royal family. But at the time of recording, this is a conflict that has really popped up in the media in the last week or so. Not so much the mainstream media. I've found all the information about this via online articles and I think through Instagram or Facebook or something like that. So this article is from abc.net.au, titled Nepalese Anti-Government Protests Continue Over Corruption and Lack of Economic Opportunity, by South Asia Bureau Chief Meghana Bali and Som Patadar in Kathmandu, and the Nepal correspondent Libby Hogan. So the title of that gives us some indication of what might be behind the conflict. Pretty universal themes. Nepal isn't the only country to have anti-government protests. Anti-government protests are, I think, universal and global at this point in time. and it's usually for the same reasons: corruption and lack of economic opportunity. I know in Australia there's a lot of protests going on about the current government and the lack of housing and jobs and immigration. I think there's a lot of people see immigration as the cause of a lot of issues. Not saying they're right, not saying they're wrong, because I don't really know much about it. But it seems like the government has been letting too many people into the country with not enough infrastructure for those that are already there, and that's having a huge effect on houses for families, job security, and basically the economic infrastructure of communities. But that's a completely different story. What started with a peaceful protest has upended Nepal in a matter of days. Some students rallied in school uniform in what have been called the Gen Z protests, calling for the government to overturn a ban on platforms like Facebook, X, and YouTube from operating in the country. Okay, interesting. Authorities responded violently, opening fire on the crowds, leaving at least 19 people dead. Okay, interesting. Yeah, a bit heavy-handed, and social media censorship has been on the cards in Australia and other countries. And once again, that's a universal theme for the day and age we find ourselves in. The anger that saw thousands rally in defence of a curfew a day later ran far deeper than concerns about access to Facebook and WhatsApp. Quote, everybody is flying out of the country for jobs. People are facing poverty here. The roads are terrible. 22-year-old Dashana Patel told the ABC. Development has not been happening because these politicians are keeping all the money in their pockets. This is affecting our future. Once again, universal. Politicians are being called out for corruption all over the world. The government backtracked on its social media ban on Tuesday, but was not enough to quell the riots. Police fired tear gas, water cannons, rubber bullets and live rounds as protesters broke through barricades at Parliament. Hundreds were injured. With the country's capital, Kathmandu, consumed by riots on Tuesday, Nepalese Prime Minister KP Sharma Oli resigned. As the news spread, convoys of motorbikes roared through the capital with riders blaring their horns and waving flags. People broke into Parliament, scrawling graffiti and chanting KP Koya Desh Cohort. Oli is a thief, leave the country. His home was set ablaze, with local media showing protests smashing windows, overturning furniture and torching the compound as outnumbered police stood by. A former Prime Minister, Jahalnath Kanil's wife, Rabbi Laxam Shitraka, I apologise for the pronunciation of these names, and not easy to say, died after sustaining critical injuries when their home was set on fire amid the unrest. Computer scientist and civil society activist Dovan Rai told the ABC she welcomed the Prime Minister's resignation, describing it as, quote, a little bit of relief in a chaotic time, but it was not enough for others after years of simmering frustration over corruption, nepotism, and broken promises in Nepal's democratic system. Quote, we don't want his resignation, we want his head, one protester told the ABC. Interesting. It seems like systemic corruption and failures are not isolated to the United States or just the West. They're a global issue. This is another quote from a protester. A leader who can order to kill a student is a crime minister, not the Prime Minister, another protester, Mandeep, said. Strong words. I guess Mr. Mandeep does make a strong argument. Once you start killing protesters, you are crossing a line that's going to be very hard to walk back. He needs to be arrested. We want blood for blood. Warriors of anarchy and a democracy betrayed. For many Nepalese, the most pressing concern is what happens next. The fall of the coalition government has left a vacuum, and the streets remain restless. Quote, we don't know how it is going to unfold, anarchy or whatever. You know, we might face some constitutional crisis, and we have a lot of right-wing extremist groups as well here. Interesting, Miss Ra said. There's also the fear of the army. It's also very alarming. She pointed to problems in Nepal's parliament, which has been paralysed by factionalism and coalitions that have reportedly collapsed in recent years, as there is no single party strong enough to govern alone. It's another recurring theme through governments throughout the world. They're not wielding the power they used to because people are just seeing through the bullshit. In France, a similar thing has been happening for a while. No parliament is strong enough to really govern by itself, especially Macron's party that's been up and down like a yo-yo. But at the heart of the anger is this sense that Nepal's democracy has been betrayed. Nepal had multiple movements for democracy, but it has still been kind of hosted by the autocratic, lazy mentality, she explained. So even though it is like a democracy on paper, people have not been able to realise it. Since the abolition of the monarchy in 2008, Nepal has struggled to build stable democratic institutions. I think a big reason for that is obviously corruption. People get in those positions of power and think they can exploit the system. They can take a couple of extra bucks for themselves and no one's going to be any wiser. Governments change frequently and political parties are often dominated by a handful of aging leaders. Another recurring theme. Miss Rai described a system captured by dynasties and loyalists. These old leaders of these old political parties, they have this kind of very nepotistic power structure. They're children or henchmen, she said. There's a lot of resentment for the nepotistic, feudal, loyalist political culture. Lack of broad social security has also attracted scrutiny from international groups, including Human Rights Watch and the International Labour Organization, the ILO, an agency of the United Nations. The ILO warned in 2023 that only about a third of the population had access to any social protection provisions. It said 20.1 million Nepalese remained without any form of social welfare support, and there were substantial gaps in covering children and healthcare. The rise of the Nepo kids. The term Nepo kids, borrowed from global debates from nepotism is in entertainment and politics, has become a rallying cry for Nepal's young protesters. Quote, in Nepal, you see the kids of these big political parties who are having these lavish weddings, but the young people, they see their future as uncertain because our government has not been able to provide them basic economic opportunities, she said. And once again, these are worldwide concerns. Every nation in the world, or most of them anyway, have the same concerns about their government, where the money's being spent. It's not being spent on the people or infrastructure projects. A lot of politicians are pocketing a lot of fucking cash under the table. And these corruption concerns seem to be a very universal theme at the moment. Nepal's youth face chronic unemployment and widespread underemployment. Once again, in the Western world, also a concern. Most people have multiple jobs because they can't afford to live on one salary. People are going to uni, spending all this money to get educated and not being able to get a job in it. It's a fucked system. Most people who get a good degree don't get a job that's related to that degree. And a lot of young people do feel very hopeless. The future does seem very uncertain because so much is changing. There's not enough regulation. Look at AI. It's just being unleashed on the world and there's been no governmental oversight whatsoever or intervention. And what have these corporations and companies done with the AI? They want to use it so they can get rid of their workforce so they don't have to pay them. They can get AI to answer the phone calls and act as a chatbot. You don't got to pay a human. It's fucking wrong. So the future is looking bleak for a lot of people. Money's always a concern. It's a huge concern of mine, as it probably is with most people out there. Some 3.5 million Nepalese are working abroad, accounting for nearly 15% of the country's local population. Interesting. Many have taken construction jobs in the Middle East, South Korea, and Malaysia, and send money home to support family. Remittance sent home in 2024 accounted for about a third of the country's GDP. For those who remain, opportunities are limited and anger has grown as images circulate of political families displaying extraordinary wealth. And where have we seen that before? If corruption and nepotism were long-standing grievances, it was the government's sudden social media ban that brought people onto the streets. Yeah, don't pay the people, but ban their social media, and that's what gets them to riot. Critics said it revealed how out of touch the government was with a generation that relied on digital platforms not only for communication but for jobs, remittances, and education. Quote, the current government was very idiotic and just dropped the social media ban without any conversation with the people, Ms. Rice said. Once again, another universal theme. Governments are fucking out of touch all over the world. There's a lot of governments that still think it's the fucking 1980s. And for years, as their governments, especially in Australia, have just ignored the power of the internet and social media, and now they want to crack down on it. Sorry, the genie's out of the bottom. This should have been done fucking 10 years ago, before it became a problem that it is today. However, another element feeding the unrest is misinformation. The government urged that it is social media reforms we needed because platforms were being used to fan disinformation and commit fraud. Locals said that a highly fragmented political scene, combined with many Nepalese living abroad, resulted in false narratives spreading quickly through digital channels. Ms. Rice said misinformation was really rampant and accused political parties themselves of using social media platforms to gain attention in a very flammable, very viral way. She was also concerned about the role of monarchist and Hindu nationalist groups trying to capitalize amid the unrest. They want to cause the demise of the democratic platform itself, she said. For many Nepalese, the unrest represents not just anger at one government, but frustration with a political system that has repeatedly failed to deliver. On the walls of the Nepalese parliament on Tuesday, protesters scrawled the words, "We won," but it remains to be seen what this so-called victory will mean for the people of Nepal. Nepal's president is scrambling to appoint a successor, and it's unclear who is in charge. A power vacuum has opened at the very top, and the army chief has appealed to citizens to maintain peace and security. Additional reporting by Patrick Martin. Interesting, another conflict arises due to these universal themes of corruption, an uncertain future, money, and the young people's place in a modern, changing world. So I'm seeing some recurring themes. So one of the other major conflicts that is a cause of a lot of anxiety in the world is Israel's war on pretty much all of its neighbours at this point. And I have a lot of listeners in Israel. I do like Israel. I think they have a right to defend themselves, especially in the wake of October 7th. But Palestine also has a right to exist. The Palestinian civilians of Gaza, a majority, don't have anything to do with Hamas. So what else happened this week? Israel bombed peace talks being held in Qatar. This got, I think, one day's play on the mainstream media. I saw a quick story about it on Tuesday. Didn't really go into much detail, just said Netanyahu had authorized the bombing of peace talks being held in Qatar. Qatar is a US ally. And it's something I really wanted to know a bit more about, which will be the next conflict we'll be looking at. So this article comes from The Conversation, titled, "Can Israel Use Self-Defense to Justify Its Strikes on Qatar Under the Law?" Published September 10th, 2025, by Shannon Bosch, Associate Professor of Law, Edith Cowan University. Israel launched a targeted airstrike on the Hamas leadership in Doha, the capital of Qatar, on Tuesday. 6 people were reportedly killed, including the son of a senior Hamas figure. Global condemnation was swift. The Qatari government called the strike, quote, "a clear breach of the rules and principles of international law," a sentiment echoed by Turkish President Erdogan, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim, and others. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres called the attack, quote, "a flagrant violation of the sovereignty and the territorial integrity of Qatar." The Prime Ministers of both the UK and Australia also said the strike violated the sovereignty of Qatar. Even US President Donald Trump, Israel's strongest ally, distanced himself from the attack. There's a quote, but I'm not quite sure who it's from. "Unilaterally bombing inside Qatar, the sovereign nation and close ally of the United States, that is working very hard and bravely taking risks with us to broker peace, does not advance Israel or America's goals." So what does the law say about this? Was Israel's attack against Hamas on the territory of another country lawful? Israel's justification. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu justified the strike by saying it targeted the political leadership of Hamas in retaliation for two attacks: a shooting in Jerusalem that killed 6 people and an attack on an army camp in Gaza that killed 4 soldiers, he said. This is a quote from him, presumably. Hamas proudly took credit for both of these actions. These are the same terrorist chiefs who planned, launched and celebrated the horrific massacres of October 7th. Yes, while October 7th was horrid in every way, it's become a bit of a blanket excuse for everything Netanyahu does. If you're going to carry out a strike against Hamas agents in another country, you might want to seek that country's permission. Because you can't just blow up a sovereign nation's building to kill enemies of Israel. This is another fucking country. That'd be like America having a drone attack in Canada because they suspected enemy of America was on Canadian soil. You kind of got to get on board with the authorities to do so. What does international law say? Article 2, in brackets 4, of the UN Charter prohibits the use of force against the, quote, territorial integrity or political independence of another state. Any use of force requires either the authorization of the UN Security Council or a justification that force is being used strictly in self-defense in accordance with Article 51 of the UN Charter. So does this mean Israel could claim self-defense against Hamas leadership in Qatar if the group did indeed direct the 2 attacks against its citizens in Jerusalem and Gaza? The answer is complicated. And I'd say that's a bit of an understatement. It sounds like it's a bit more complicated than just Israel seeking Qatar's approval to carry out an attack. You have to go through the UN Security Council, and that probably wouldn't get the desired answer. There'd probably be a lot of red tape and hoops to jump through in order to get approval for an attack such as this. But on the other hand, does Israel have a point? I suppose if they can prove that its citizens were attacked in Jerusalem and Gaza by Hamas and it was authorized by the leadership who happens to be in Qatar, is that justification? Who knows? Self-defense against groups like Hamas. The International Court of Justice, the ICJ, has repeatedly stressed the paramount importance of territorial sovereignty in international law. As such, it has restricted the use of self-defense to armed attacks that can be attributed to a state, not merely to non-state actors operating from a state's territory. After September 11, 2001 terror attacks, the United States and other countries claimed they could use force in self-defense against non-state actors, such as terrorist groups that are sheltering or operating from another state's territory, even if the state was not directly involved. Interesting. Sounds like a bit of a law to just go after enemies of the state who are in a foreign country, unless I've interpreted that wrong. In response to these developments, Sir Daniel Bethlehem, an expert in international law and foreign policy, advisor to the UK government, proposed several principles aimed at curtailing this justification within the intent of Article 51. The quote Bethlehem principles, which remain contested, argue that Article 51 can cover actual or imminent attacks by terrorist groups, but only if necessity, the use of force in self-defense is truly a last resort, and proportionality are satisfied. Moreover, as a result, force on another state's soil requires the consent of that state. I thought it would. The only narrow exceptions are when there's reasonable, objective belief that the host state is colluding with the group or is unable or unwilling to stop it, and no other reasonable option short of force exists. I guess this is where the confusion lies, because Qatar was hosting peace negotiations with Hamas. They were in a position that they could peacefully come to some type of conclusion. It doesn't seem like Israel had gone to too much effort to try to persuade or apprehend the Hamas agents in any other way. They just authorized the bombing strike on it because they were all conveniently at the same location at the same time. rather than using other more diplomatic channels to get what they wanted. I mean, I'm not an expert in this at all, but I'm just basing my opinions off of what I'm reading. Doesn't sound like Qatar is in collusion with Hamas. They were merely hosting the peace talks. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't. I don't know. But that also brings up the other problem of, were they unable or unwilling to stop it? It sounds like they were in the process of trying to put a peace agreement in place. Israel argues Hamas leadership based abroad in countries such as Qatar, Lebanon, and Iran remains part of the command structure that orchestrates hostilities against its soldiers in Gaza and citizens in Israel. Okay, so there is some type of Hamas command structure in Qatar. Okay, is that justification for bombing it? Would that constitute as unable or unwilling to stop Hamas leadership? That alone, however, is not enough to justify self-defense according to the Bethlehem Principles. Okay, interesting. By Netanyahu's own admission, the objective of the Qatar strike was retaliatory, not to prevent an ongoing or imminent attack. Okay, so we're getting to the crux of things. There wasn't an imminent attack on Israel. The attack was already in the past. Here lies the murky waters surrounding the issue. Questions could also be raised about whether proportionality was observed given the diplomatic context of striking a sovereign state, any potential for disproportionate civilian harm in this part of Doha, which houses many diplomatic residents. Yeah, I mean, civilians could have been hit by shrapnel. It was a pretty large explosion. It was a sizable building too. Targeting political leaders meeting in a third state, especially one engaged in mediation, also raises questions about whether force was the only means available to address the threat proposed by Hamas in this situation. Yes, that would be a very good point, because you could talk it out. I mean, that was kind of the point of these peace talks. There was probably other ways around just blowing them up. Moreover, under these principles, Israel would need to demonstrate that Qatar is either colluding with or is unable or unwilling to stop Hamas, and that there was no other effective or reasonable way to respond to the situation. Qatar has hosted Hamas political officers since 2012 and has been one of the group's main financial backers since it came to power in Gaza. At the same time, Qatar has played an important mediation role since the October 7 attacks. Okay, interesting. So sounds like Qatar is kind of the middleman. I could kind of see how Israel would view them as maybe a potential threat. Are they just being benevolent? Are they just sitting on the fence in this one and letting Qatar just take up office and residence in their country because they don't want any part of a war? Are they just a neutral player in this, like Switzerland? It does sound like a very complicated issue, and it does sound like a very complicated issue, which is no surprise. It does seem like everything in the Middle East is complicated. There's not a straightforward answer to anything. This makes it difficult to argue Qatar is unwilling or unable to neutralize Hamas operations from its territory. Its mediation would also suggest there is a reasonably effective alternative to force to counter Hamas's actions. Without UN Security Council authorization, Israel's strikes on Qatar do appear to be a violation of territorial sovereignty and possibly an act of aggression under the UN Charter. This is further bolstered by the narrow approach the IC has taken on self-defense against non-state actors in third-party states and its stringent requirements of proportionality and necessity, neither of which appear to have been met. Interesting. So what do you think? Israel seems to be doing whatever Israel wants to do. And there's only so many times you can use the blanket statement that we're avenging October 7 as justification to just bomb anybody you like. Yes, what happened on October 7th was heinous and a horrific crime, and Israel is 100% justified in retaliation for that, and starving people to death in the Gaza Strip is not the way to do it. And that's where the big problem lies and why the public support for Israel has been turned on its head. They've gone from the victim to the perpetrator, because once a lot of civilians started to get killed, the public support shifted from Israel over to Palestine very quickly, and people were not necessarily supporting a terrorist organization, but were not looking at the Israeli side of it either. They were just backing Palestinians, and then you fast forward a few months, and then people are wearing Hamas headbands to quote-unquote peaceful rallies and demonstrations for the Palestinian state. Pretty much just the way things have gone in the last couple of years. They go from complex to being even more confusing and even more complex. And that was from the conversation.com. The Israel-Palestinian situation is very complex because on the one hand, Israel has the right to defend itself against terrorism and further attacks on its people, but you have to not be human to completely overlook the suffering of the Palestinian people. I don't want to see dead kids on the TV. Yeah, it is a very delicate situation, and it's one you could just do an entire podcast series on. I don't know what the answer is. I don't think anyone does. Hopefully peace can find a way, because what is happening on both sides is absolutely horrific. I don't want to see starving Palestinians. I don't want to see dead Israelis either. Why can't both sides get along? Yeah, it's a hard and complex situation from an outsider looking in. Back to conflicts that have happened this week. Probably the most widely reported on conflict is the ongoing war in Ukraine, which, according to some experts, is now further along than World War II was, which is fucking horrifying. Putin seems to be stringing Trump along. I don't think he really wants peace. If he did, he wouldn't be going to a peace summit, then launching the biggest drone strike of the war a couple of days later. What would be the point in that? He's just jerking everyone around. And keeping with the theme of conflict, I've read a couple of articles this week about the very real possibility that World War III has already begun or is very close to beginning, which is fucking horrifying, and just what 2025 needs, a global conflict. That made me think, would we even know World War III had begun? There are so many things happening and so many distractions on a daily basis. Would we even recognize what was right in front of us, given the information overload? World War III could have already started, and we probably wouldn't know until it had already progressed far enough to really recognize that, fuck, this is a global conflict, and it's probably going to get a hell of a lot worse before it gets better. In my opinion, I think World War III has begun. In a globalized world, what actually constitutes as a world war now? And when you think of the Ukraine-Russia war, how many countries are actually involved? Most of the big world players are involved in some way or form. The US, Europe, such as Germany, France, the Netherlands, the UK, Poland are all involved. US, UK, France, and Germany are the biggest supplier of weapons and military equipment to Ukraine. Australia has sent military equipment to Ukraine. So has other parts of the world. Then on the other side, you got North Korea and China all sending equipment and troops to Russia, and the Russians selling their embargoed oil to countries like India, China, North Korea, and places like that. So could you make an argument that the Ukraine-Russia conflict is already a world war? And then you have foreign fighters on both sides from all countries around the world and different walks of life. So you could, in fact, make the argument that World War III has already begun, or Russia-Ukraine isn't isolated to Russia and Ukraine, that it's got a far bigger global reach than a lot of people realize. Which brings up the question, is Russia the new Germany? America seems to fund everybody these days, whether they're the good guys or the bad guys. They don't get involved, but they do dodgy dealings in the shadows, which helps to destabilize the world even further. Who are the good guys and who are the bad guys anymore? I don't think we would know if World War III had started. Russia is the new Germany, one country that's going to take on everybody. Because let's not forget, World War II, you had the Allies on one side and you had Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan on the other side, and look what two relatively small countries did on a global scale. Is Russia just a replacement of Germany? It does seem like history has repeated itself in this weird, backwards, inverted way. It's a very weird time to live in when you think about just all the conflict and all the dodgy shit that's been going on behind the scenes. Talking about things inverting on itself. The good guys are the bad guys are the good guys, or alternatively, there are no good guys anymore, and everyone is just a varying degree of bad, worse, or evil. And as I mentioned about conflicts of the 1900s, you knew who the bad guys were and who the good guys were. That doesn't seem to be the case anymore. Everyone is a varying degree of bad, worse, or evil. So who knows what the future will hold? Is the next significant conflict going to be China versus Taiwan? Or China, North Korea versus Taiwan and Japan? It's only a week or two ago since the leaders of North Korea, Russia, China were at the Chinese 80th anniversary defeat of Imperial Japan. And what an interesting day that turned out to be. Going back to Russia, Ukraine for a minute. This week has seen another milestone in that conflict where Russian drones were shot down over Polish territory, which is a pretty big escalation in the conflict, or was it just simply an accident? To dig a bit deeper into this, I found an article on theguardian.com titled "Poland Closer to Military Conflict Than at Any Time Since World War II, as NATO Allies Weigh Response to Russian Drones." It's by Sean Walker in Kyiv, Dan Shibag, Jakub Krapa, and Porter Sawyer. I do apologise for the pronunciation of those names. Published Thursday, 11th of September 2025. Donald Tusk says Poland dealing with a large-scale provocation after at least 19 violations of Polish airspace. Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk said the country is closer to military conflict, quote, than at any time since the Second World War, as Warsaw and NATO allies weighed a response to the incursion of Russian drones into Polish airspace. Poland scrambled its own NATO air defences, shooting down at least 3 drones, as Russia's attack on Ukraine spread to NATO territory early on Wednesday, in the most significant way since the full-scale invasion more than 3 years ago. Interesting. Is this just a case of mistaken identity or an accident on the Russians' part, or were they testing the defences to see what the reaction would be because they plan on trying to take Poland? That would be a bit of a stretch, I would imagine, because I don't think the Russian military has the resources to pick a fight with Poland as well as Ukraine. You'd have to control a fair bit of the border around Ukraine and Poland to be able to do that. And so far, the Russians seem to be mostly isolated to the Donbass regions on the border with Russia, that area. So is this just a case of just testing defences to see what NATO's response is going to be? Because it does seem pretty dodgy. I don't think it's an accident. With all the technology now, it seems pretty unlikely that such a large mistake could happen. And Mr. Tusk seems to be on the money with a lot of things. He's been saying that World War III is coming for a very long time and has spent billions of dollars upgrading the Polish army. I think they have the largest army in Europe at the moment, or have spent the most money. So he seems to know something that the rest of the world doesn't seem to be taking as seriously. If he says that a military conflict is closer than at any time since World War II, I'd definitely listen to him. In the aftermath, Warsaw said NATO allies had made concrete proposals to bolster the country's air defences. The UK is considering deploying Typhoon jets as part of a enhanced air policing mission to protect the alliance's eastern flank. It's quite a lot too when you think about it. It's not like 1 or 2 drones just straight across the border, that it's 19 of them. Does seem a little unlikely that it could be an accident. And some of them had entered Poland from Belarusian territory. 4 Polish airports, including the 2 that serve Warsaw, were closed to traffic during the incursion. The Prime Minister of the Netherlands, Dick Schoof, said F-35 jets from his country took part in the mission to intercept the drones. At least 3 drones were shot down. Interesting. So if they come from Belarus, were they supposed to go to Ukraine and got lost or went across the wrong border? Or was it a targeted probing attack to see what the reaction would be? Tusk, who convened an emergency cabinet meeting on Wednesday morning, said, quote, "We are dealing with a large-scale provocation. We are ready to repel such provocations. The situation is serious, and no one doubts that we must prepare for various scenarios." On social media, Donald Trump posted, "What's with Russia violating Poland's airspace with drones? Here we go! Exclamation point! Exclamation mark." The White House said Trump would speak to Poland's newly elected nationalist president, Karl Nawrocki, I think that's how you pronounce his name, while the US ambassador to NATO, Matthew Whitaker, reiterated backing for Warsaw amid concerns in Europe over how the Trump administration might respond to a Russian attack on NATO. Quote, "We stand by our NATO allies in the face of these airspace violations and will defend every inch of NATO territory," wrote Whitaker in a post on X. The British Defence Secretary John Healey said he had asked the UK Armed Forces to look at, quote, "options to bolster NATO's air defence over Poland." He was speaking after an E5 meeting of ministers from France, Germany, the UK, Italy and Poland, which the Polish counterpart had left early to return home due to the drone incursion. Healey said, quote, "Today, as 5 nations, we say to President Putin, your aggression only serves to strengthen the unity between our NATO nations. Your aggressions only serve to strengthen our determination to stand with Ukraine. Russia launches almost nightly attacks on Ukraine using large kamikaze drones based on an Iranian design and known informally as Shaheeds." Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky said on Wednesday morning that 415 drones and 40 missiles have been used in the overnight attack, most targeting western parts of the country. 1 person was killed in Zhytomyr region. I'm mispronouncing that. Once again, it's this very delicate situation. Who's telling the truth, who's not? Because that doesn't sound like Putin is too interested in peace if he is sending 40 missiles and 450 drones into Ukraine. That doesn't suggest the actions of someone interested in peace. Zelensky urged NATO countries to launch a strong response to the incursion into Poland. Moscow is always testing the limits of the possible, and if it does not meet a strong reaction, moves to a new level of escalation, Zelensky wrote in a post on social media. Quote, "Today was another escalatory step, not one Shaheed, which could have been called an accident, but at least 8 attack drones which targeted Poland." And yeah, it's kind of how I'm seeing this. It's a targeted probing assault to see what the reaction would be. Are the Polish just going to let it go and just assume it was an accident? Or are they going to retaliate with force? Why is Putin testing the waters like this? Is he planning on trying to take Poland as well? I mean, good fucking luck. Russia's defense ministry released a statement saying Moscow had, quote, "no intentions to engage any targets on the territory of Poland." Well, of course they would. Without confirming or denying that its drones had entered Polish airspace, we are ready to hold consultations on this subject with the Polish Defense Ministry, it added. Russia's charge d'affaires in Poland, Andrzej Ordash, called the accusations against Moscow groundless, saying no evidence has been presented proving these drones are of Russian origin. Drones came from somewhere. There's only so many countries that have these kamikaze-style drones. Poland's Foreign Minister Radosław Sikorski said Warsaw had, quote, "no doubt that it was dealing with a deliberate attack. When 1 or 2 drones does it, it is possible that it was a technical malfunction, but in the case there were 19 breaches and it simply defies imagination that it could be accidental," he said. Other Polish and European officials agreed, saying the number of drones that entered Polish airspace made it unlikely to be an accident. One of the drones damaged a building on the ground in eastern Poland, but there were no reports of casualties. Tusk insisted there was no reason to panic, but said Poland had invoked NATO's Article 4 requesting formal consultations with the alliance. Article 4 has been invoked only 7 times since NATO's creation in 1949, with the last time in 2022 in the immediate aftermath of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. Andriy Sabiha, however you pronounce his name, Ukraine's foreign minister, called on neighbouring countries to shoot down Russian missiles and drones over Ukrainian airspace, especially in the western regions of the country, close to the border with NATO nations. Quote, Ukraine has suggested such a step for a long time. It needs to be taken for the sake of collective security, he said. Up to now, Ukraine's neighbours have declined to do so, fearing the escalatory potential of directly engaging with Russian missiles and drones. But you also have a right to defend your borders too. Russia can't just launch drones into every fucking neighbouring country and expect no retaliation of any kind. Like the above mentioned, 19 is a hell of a lot of drones to just stray across the border, and doesn't appear to be an accident. Russia and Belarus hold a big military drill on Friday known as Zapad, which has raised security concerns in the region and led to Poland closing all its land borders with Belarus. Trump came into office promising a swift end to the war, but has proved unable to persuade Putin to agree to a ceasefire. A bilateral summit in Alaska last month yielded few results, and Kyiv hopes Trump will put pressure on Moscow after deadlines set by the White House for Russia were ignored. Earlier this week, an Iskander cruise missile hit the cabinet of ministers, a key government building in Kyiv. Wednesday's incursion into Poland was the first reported occasion when NATO defense forces had directly engaged Russian drones. Poland had been on alert for craft entering its airspace since a stray Ukrainian missile struck a southern Polish village in 2022, killing 2 people. Polish authorities closed several airports, including Chopin Airport in Warsaw, the country's largest and the key logistics and arms transfer hub in southeastern city of Revasov, however it's pronounced. Departures were delayed for several hours, and a number of arriving flights were diverted to other Polish airports. An Air China plane from Beijing due to land Chopin was sent to Copenhagen. Interesting and concerning. So what do the Polish know that the rest of the world is ignoring? How long can the Russia-Ukraine conflict last? How many troops does Putin have? How many supplies? How much military equipment? These resources are finite. The Russians have already lost a staggering amount of personnel and equipment. I think they've had over 1 million casualties in the first year or first few years. The equipment losses have been significant as well. They wouldn't be needing equipment or weaponry from North Korea or China if that wasn't the case. So how long can the conflict realistically last? Both sides have finite resources, and neither the Russian or Ukrainian armies have an infinite amount of people. Now, if this keeps up, what does the geopolitical landscape look like in 10 years? It's fucking scary to think about.
Aussie Afterlife is a podcast that retells true paranormal stories and presents real audio evidence such as EVPs from my own paranormal investigations. My name is Sam, and I am the sole creator and host of this enthralling podcast. I have always had a deep fascination and love for the paranormal. So naturally, I thought, well, why not create a podcast? Like, I'm 35. I've got to make myself relevant in some way, right? I was always surprised at how many everyday people have had paranormal experiences. Like, we all can't be wrong or going mad. Well, we can, but no, we can't. I'm going to stick with you. Can't all be wrong. Otherwise, I'd have to come to the realization that I've wasted an enormous amount of time. Anyway, if you want to hear true paranormal stories and real ghostly voices, come join Aussie Afterlife. It's the most fun you'll have with your clothes on. Or you might not have clothes on. I wouldn't know either way. That adds a different layer of mystery again, doesn't it? See? It's exciting already. Come on. press play. You know you want to.
All right, I think we'll leave it there and pick it up in the next episode. Part 2 should be out in the next week or two. And we'll continue our look at the events of the past couple of weeks. We'll get into the assassination of Charlie Kirk, political violence in the US, and mass shootings. A big thank you to everyone who listened to the end. If you'd like to support the Truth Tank, there's a couple of things you can do. Head on over to the Facebook and Instagram page, give them a follow and a like. You can download and listen to your favourite episodes on Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Audible, YouTube, Castbox, Pandora, iHeartRadio, or wherever else you get podcasts from. Tell your friends, tell your family, tell anyone you think might like the show. Help spread it around and get the word out there. You can also leave a 5-star rating and review on your preferred podcast player. Every review helps the show grow and get found. If you haven't listened to The Lie of Communism, please do so. It's well worth the wait. And I'll be back with part 2 of American Martyr in the next week or two. But until then, I'm the Tank, this is the truth. Truth to tell.